Delaware, Missouri, Nevada, Wyoming,
Yes.
and Missouri. And so when you have clients come, I mean, do you lay all those options out for them, or what do you typically do?
To be honest with you, usually when we have clients come into the firm, they're already incorporated, so we don't generally have that type of a say. If they're starting new firms, what I've heard is there's really no reason, not necessarily much reason to, if you're not planning on getting sued anytime soon, there's not any reason not to go to Missouri. It has a lot of those protections that Delaware law has, and it's closer to home. So Delaware is obviously the fashionable choice, and if you're going to solicit larger investments, like I said before, more sophisticated investors might be more comfortable with that. But if it's a smaller venture, then there's nothing wrong with a Missouri company.
Can you switch?
Absolutely. You can switch between any of these. You can be in Missouri LLC and switch to a Delaware corporation, and it's not very hard at all. It only takes a filing of a few forms, a few $100, which could be big, but it could be a drop in the bucket if it's a larger venture. You can do both. You can actually just switch to a Delaware you can switch to a Delaware corporation, Delaware LLC.
What do you get with switching and not creating a new one? I mean, why you should switch? I mean, do you get any benefit from the history that you switch?
Well, you have a.
Would you mind repeating the question so that people
Oh, I'm sorry.
can know what you're answering?
He's asking why would we switch rather than just starting a new venture? And I would say because you keep all your books and records together, your accounting records in the same spot. I mean, if you're starting a new venture, then you have a whole separate books and a whole separate record keeping process for that. Why not just switch over? You could start a new venture and then transfer all of your assets over, but that's a lot more work than just switching the existing entity over to and pay a couple $100 for the switch. Fill out a couple of forms, not too hard.
I have a question.
Sure, no, go ahead.
Registered agent.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do I find him and what kind of services
Oh.
does he provide?
Well, the registered agent, I'm sorry, he's asking who is where can I find a registered agent and what type of services that he provides. The registered agent, all they do is receive service of process, which means if somebody else wants to initiate a lawsuit against the corporation or company, that is the person that they hand the lawsuit to. Because it's a corporation, it's a person, right, technically, but they don't really have an existence in reality as we know it. It's not a natural person. So there needs to be a natural person that gets handed the service of process. The petition is what we call it, to file a claim against the company. And how do we find these? Actually, there's huge. You don't have to go to an individual and most of them don't. Especially if you're a Missouri person and you want to start a company in Delaware, you have to have your processor. You have to have your registered agent in Delaware. And there's a bunch of companies that's all they do is they act as a registered agent for corporations.
And if my company is in Missouri, can I be myself the agent?
Absolutely, you can be your own registered agent. No problem with that. He asked if you can be his own registered agent, and the answer to that is yes.
That's only in Missouri.
No. You can always be your own. She asked if that's only in Missouri. Oh, sorry. You can always be your own registered agent. Now,
Even if you're incorporating in Delaware.
well, you'd have to have an office in Delaware. You'd have to be in Delaware. Now, your registered agent has to be in that state. So what I meant by that was if you were living in Delaware and with a Delaware organization, then you could be your own registered agent. Sorry.
I have a question about
Absolutely.
partnership and limited liability.
Yeah.
Can it be partnership with limited liability, or it's completely two different entities?
There are different, a partnership is a non-statute, he asked if if you can be a partnership and a limited liability company, or you have to be two separate entities. A partnership is a non-statutory entity, which means you don't file anything with the Secretary of State. You might have a partnership agreement, but not necessarily. And that's a different type of entity. It's treated differently than an LLC. An LLC, you can elect to be, and actually, in fact, the default position of an LLC is to be taxed like a partnership. And you can create an LLC structure within your operating agreement that acts very much like a partnership would. Basically, so in that situation, you're getting a lot of the benefits of a partnership and you're getting the limited liability of the limited liability company without much downside. So people don't do partnerships very much anymore. Now, there are other entities, limited liability partnerships and limited liability limited partnerships, but those are usually reserved for professions, and I didn't want to necessarily confuse everybody with those other entities at this time.
So when you're going to choose which type of entity you're going to file as, are there certain types of companies that work better as others, or is it just strictly preference of looking at the pros and cons of each and saying, oh, I like this better than the other?
Well, she asked if certain companies or certain types of companies lend themselves towards certain entities, or if it's just personal preference to a degree. Well, there's going to be a lot of factors that go into it beyond what I explained today. But what we see mostly is if more closely held companies are going to be, they appreciate the flexible structure of the LLC because they don't have to have so much, they don't have to have so many regulatory oversights. Did we write our board of our resolution documents, which usually just an attorney's going to write up anyway. So they appreciate the ability to have that extra flexibility. A corporation, if you're going to have institutional investors, you're going to need a corporation a lot of times. But everything can be almost everything is flexible. It just depends on how much work you want to put into it. You can have an institutional investor with an LLC, but it might be more complex because then you have to revise the operating agreement, give that institutional investor certain rights that they want to, where that's going to be a lot easier to do with a corporation.
Can you change? So can you start as an LLC and then?
Yes. Like I said, like before, she asked, can you change from LLC to a corporation? Absolutely. And you can change back, like I said, with the S Corp. You can be a C Corp. You started as a C Corp. You can elect to go to an S Corp to take advantage of that pass-through taxation. And then you can go back to a C Corp, although there's a time you have to wait, so people don't take advantage of the system. But
I would like to, one of the questions from one of the webinar people is, what are the pros and cons of creating a nonprofit, and what are the restrictions on that?
the pros and cons of a nonprofit. Well, that's a little bit outside the scope of what I've prepared for this, but the pros and cons of a nonprofit. Well, as far as you can't make this in a nonprofit, you can't make distributions to your charitable donors. All of the money that you received from your donations has to be put back into the 501c3, and so they're not going to be able to get their money back out. Clearly, that's not what the 501c3 is for.
So it might be tougher to find a
I'm sorry what they do get is it might be tougher. He asked if it might be tougher to find people to put money into the nonprofit. Well, yeah, but you do get a tax deduction as long as it's a incorporated 501c3. You get a tax deduction on your donation to that corporation. So that can be nice.
So if this has an international scope, do you think that any difference between the states would be important to know?
Yes, absolutely. He asked if you have an international business, what would be important to know. You don't want to have, you can't have an S corp for one thing. S corp shareholders have to be natural persons and U.S. citizens. You are not going to want to have an LLC. Actually, this recently happened with one of our clients. He is running into problems because he's trying to solicit investment in Europe, but the European investors are refusing to invest in his United States LLC. I'm not sure if that's peculiar to this particular investment group, but I would imagine it's not, and I think it's because there are certain tax implications, like a 30% tax on distributions or something like that to United States LLC. I could be, I'm gonna check myself, so I don't want to say anything stupid, but yes, absolutely. I think a corporation is going to be much more suited to having foreign investment than an LLC.
Are there maintenance fees to keep an LLC in existence?
I think there is an annual filing fee. He asked if there's maintenance fees. I'm not sure what it is. I know there's I know for an LLC there's an initial fee, and from what I understand, there's a regular fee for corporations. But for an LLC, I actually don't know, so I'm going to say that.
There is one more question, but I'm not sure it's relevant.
Shoot.
Someone wants to know what a 501c3 is.
Oh. What is a 501c3? A 501c3 is a corporation that is simply a non-for-profit corporation. You have to file certain documents, certain forms have to be filled out to basically ensure that your company is not just taking advantage of a non-for-profit status for personal gain of the management team and the donors. So it's a very good way to you have to have some type of a charitable cause, which they can be somewhat lenient about. But it can be a very good way to do something that can give back to the community. But it's definitely not a 501c3 is not something that you're, well, unless you're a church, you're probably not going to get rich with it. Yes.
The person that holds the record in whichever state you incorporate in, I forgot what you call them,
The registered
the
agent?
registered agent.
They're where you serve the process to.
Okay, how do they get paid? Or do
Oh, you have to
get
pay.
paid
You
by
have a
day?
contractual. How does the registered agent get paid? Is the question. You have to have a contract with the registered agent to become your registered agent.
And then is it, and a lot of times say you get served with a lawsuit, then you pay them per case, or is it just?
No. They're all they're there for is to receive the paperwork essentially that so the Constitution demands that that a person be served with process for a lawsuit, and this is how corporations get served with the process because they're not natural persons. So it resolves the problem of who do you serve process to. So you can do it yourself, but usually your founders or your CEO or somebody that has any know-how or importance in the organization has better things to do than receive service of process. So you designate somebody else to do it, and they'll receive it, and then they'll transfer that to your legal department.
Is there a minimum number of members or shareholders in an LLC?
No. Oh, well, okay. You can do, I'm sorry. Is there a minimum number of shareholders or it would actually be members in an LLC, correct? No, you can be a single person LLC. Yeah. You can be a single person corporation in some states, like those ones that we just talked about. Other ones don't allow it. So, and I don't know all 50 states, to be honest with you. So.
Now, if you talk about member managed LLCs, and
Yes.
what's the other one?
Manager managed.
Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is?
Oh, okay. All right, so can we talk about, He wants me to talk about the difference between the member-managed LLC and the manager-managed LLC. We're gonna put a provision in your operating agreement that says if it's a member-managed or manager-managed. And what that's understood to mean is that, in a, say like hypochondriac, for example, let's say the members are just Albert, Bob, and Charlie, and we're gonna make it a member-managed LLC. In that situation, Albert, Bob, and Charlie would all be intimately involved with the day-to-day operations, and they would make those decisions together. In a manager-managed LLC, you might have a situation where Charlie, Bob, and Albert, maybe they're going to appoint Albert to be the manager, or maybe they appoint somebody else altogether to be the manager, where Albert, Bob, and Charlie, maybe they don't want to do any, maybe they just want to be passive investors in this, in the LLC. So they're going to hire somebody that actually knows what they're doing to manage the day-to-day operations, and they're going to pay them a salary generally, or a management fee in that situation. So in those situations, you give the manager much more power, obviously, over you trust him with the day-to-day operations of the organization.
Does becoming an LLC limit you in any way as far as exit strategies go?
He asked, does the LLC limit you in any way for exit strategies? Well, if you're looking to exit through a European acquisition, then that's when I know for sure that's more obvious. It doesn't have to. But like I said, some people that are in acquisitions, or obviously an IPO, you're going to need a corporation. You cannot have an LLC that does an IPO, initial public offering.
Okay, but would it be more difficult for you to have an LLC, switch to a corporation, then go to IPO? Well, would that be more difficult than having a corporation?
Would it be more difficult to have an LLC and switch to a corporation? Yes, it would be, but it depends on how old. Well, an IPO, you're talking about a pretty established business. So yeah, that could probably be a headache, and from a legal framework and an administrative standpoint. If you're getting acquired after 3 years or so, it might not be a big deal to switch over, and if the acquiring company demands it, which might not necessarily be the case. So, thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it.